Aloha, I'm Malia Zimmerman, and this is News Behind the News. Today I want to welcome Lowell Kalapa. He is an expert in so many things, but definitely expert in your pocketbook and how our taxes and fees here in Hawaii and special funds and unfunded liabilities affect your pocketbook. I want to welcome him here today. Thanks for joining us, Lowell.
It's nice to be here.
Lowell is, tell us about the Tax Foundation, because you are a gem in this community. You're always at the legislature, at the council, fighting for the taxpayer, and you really need to tell us about your organization so people know how to support you and reach you.
Yeah, well, Malia, a lot of people think we're just another department within government, and that's not true. We are totally independent. We're a nonprofit organization that was founded basically to examine and watch and monitor tax policy and public finance policy at the state and local level. And so we do a lot of research during the down periods of the interims between the legislative sessions. We work not only with the legislature, but also with the city councils and, of course, the mayors and the governor and his administration as well. So we are there to remind people of what good tax policy is, and that it's a tax system that treats everybody fairly and squarely, if you will, and nobody pays more than they have to.
Well, a lot of times, you take the position that may not be as popular, or you stand up to government when there's no one else doing that, and you kind of say, hey, this isn't working, but this is a good idea. So, you're a really amazing resource in the community for people to have, and also for the media as well.
Well, we help not only the elected official, but we also help the public understand, what seems to be a very complex issue called taxes. And as you, as a reporter, know, we also try to help the reporters get the word out correctly, because even the reporters have a hard time understanding different complex finance issues and how to balance it and make it fair. So our real mission is to educate the public.
Most reporters will admit that math is not their strong point. So thank you for helping us all understand not only the tax code and the different kinds of taxes that we have here, but also special funds and all the other financial issues, and tax credits is another hot topic here.
Right.
Well, right now in the news, there's a big issue about special funds. And the funny part is that for years and years and years, special funds have been there. The legislature's added more and more special funds. And for people that might not know what that is, it's just a fund where they set aside money for a special purpose. And you can talk more about that. But now we've had more and more and more special funds, and it's so hard to keep track of what money's in there. And there's shell games with different monies when it comes time to balance the budget. The legislature raids this or that, and so here we are thinking, for example, we put money in the transportation fund or the gas taxes, and we put it in for a purpose of fixing roads. Little do we know it's rated for something else, and that goes on and on. So tell us about special funds.
Well, special funds really blossomed toward the end of the 1980s, when the state legislature was faced with the embarrassing dilemma of having almost a $500 million surplus in what's called the general fund. And the general fund is basically at that time is where almost all taxes went and were deposited, and then the various departments and programs came to the legislature and had to justify the expenditure of funds, because they all competed with each other. And it was up to the legislature, the policy-making body, to set priorities for those dollars. But because the state general fund had grown a huge surplus, due largely to, first of all, the enactment of the TAT, or the hotel room tax, in 1986, they didn't put that into any designated fund like it was supposed to go for the convention center, the building of the convention center. And the fact in 1986 the federal government broadened the tax base for the federal income tax law that we adopted, but they lowered their rates and we didn't. We gave away a $100 tax credit and called it a food tax credit. And so the general fund just grew fatter and fatter, so that by the end of 1989, someone came up with the right idea to tuck away some money into a special fund. And in this case, it was a motherhood and apple pie issue of the backlog of repairs needed for our educational facilities. And so they established the first gigantic special fund called the Educational Facilities Special Fund. And it was hard to argue against the fact that we were putting money aside to repair our schools, which were in such disrepair. But to put $90 million of general excise taxes aside, kind of popped everybody's eyeballs, and that's a lot of money. And so basically they earmarked what's known as the general excise, your 4% quote-unquote sales tax, $90 million to go into a special fund even before it was deposited to the general fund. And we objected at that time from the standpoint that we have a constitutional limit on expenditures from the general fund. And that was enacted almost a decade before because people were concerned that government would grow so fast that the economy that supports that government couldn't keep up with it. So they tied the constitutional general fund spending limit to the growth in the economy. Well, when they earmarked that $90 million, they could spend it without it being counted against the constitutional limit, and that's what we objected to. And come to find out, within 2 or 3 years, the state's finances went into the tank, and suddenly it looked like a big piggy bank to rob, and they took the money out basically from the Educational Facility Special Fund. But in the meantime, other people came up with ideas to carve out other pieces of the general fund tax base to put in special funds. And now, a reporter asked me the other day, how much do we have in special funds? And I said, I can't tell you with any certainty, and neither can the state auditor, of all people who has access to all of the information about state government, claims that she doesn't really even know how much is in all the special funds. But what we do know is that more and more of our operating budget is being spent out of special funds. So maybe about 10 years ago, the percentage was maybe 11% of the state operating budget. It's now up to 17.5% growing. And that's of concern because it's not counted against the spending limit. We don't know how fast government has grown relative to general fund expenditures because those revenues are no longer general fund receipts. So in a sense, the taxpayer is being duped into a much larger government without knowing it.
That really sums it up, Lowell. Give people an example. Like I used the transportation fund. I can't even remember exactly what it was called. But give us an example maybe of some special funds that we've seen rated, like maybe the hurricane fund or the rainy day fund, or are there some other funds that you've seen where we put money in a special fund and we're told as taxpayers that that's what that's going to be used for?
Well, let me correct you. The transportation special funds are some of the few special funds that are legitimate. Mm-hmm. And they are special funds because of the revenue sharing that we get from the federal government. Mm-hmm. So when the federal government gives us money for highways, it has to go into a special fund or an account. It can only be used for highways.
Now, I'm just brought up highways because I remembered back during the Lingle administration, there was a controversy over 10 years of rating from a transportation fund, and I'm not sure which one it was.
It was the Highway Transportation Fund. Mm-hmm. And, the thing is that that raised some serious questions because we also have a provision for the Highway Special Fund, all the transportation special funds, that they have to carry over a surplus that is sufficient to cover the debt service for the next year. And so when they started doing that, they had to change that provision. And it really, I think, injured the bond ratings for transportation special funds, special fund bonds that we borrow. So even though those are sacrosanct in the sense that we have to have them for federal funding purposes, many of the other special funds have no legitimate reason to be there. And one of them, of course, is the one that has caught the fancy of people who are interested in affordable housing as well as conservation, and that's the special funds that were created out of the increased taxes generated by the conveyance tax. Originally, the conveyance tax was set at a rate of $0.05 per $100 of value, and it was just a tacit amount, if you will, because what they collected was information about the value that was transferred. So when you sold a house, you paid the conveyance tax, you registered its value by paying the conveyance tax, and that helped the real property assessor when he goes or she goes to value property for real property tax purposes. They can look at the conveyance records and say, oh, yeah, that house sold for X number of dollars, and so the value of all the houses in that neighborhood that have similar complexity, if you will, or structure, should be valued at that price because that's the going demand for that type of house. They started to raise that conveyance tax back in the early 1990s. First they doubled it from 5 to 10, nobody paid attention. But in the early 2000s, it became the target for substantial increases such that now the maximum tax rate is something like $1 per $100 or $1.25 per $100 of value for any sale that's more than $1 million. And you go, oh, that's all right, that's those Japanese investors, good for them. Well, they don't realize that applies to commercial property and industrial property. So when they raise that conveyance tax, in essence, it penalizes the business on that property, and the only way that business is going to recover is by raising their prices that they charge me, the customer.
Now, a lot of people have homes that may be on a property that they've had for years and years, and they have a little home there, but maybe the property is 10,000 square feet or so on. Like, I'm thinking of some of these properties in Kailua that are worth $1 million now.
They are worth $1 million.
And you look at the house and you say, my goodness, it's single wall construction. It's a little plantation home, but it happens to be on a 10,000 square foot lot in Kailua. So. It's worth $1 million. And so really to get to $1 million these days in Hawaii is not that difficult.
It's not that difficult. And the outfall, if you will, or the side effect, if you will, is that now people are finding ways to circumvent paying the conveyance tax. And that's been an issue at the legislature, and I will point out the two obvious examples. One is the sale of what used to be the Victoria Ward properties, which was then purchased by General Growth, and then when General Growth sold it off to the Howard Hughes Corporation, that's when the higher rates were in effect, and instead of actually selling the property, they sold the company. And so there is no conveyance tax on the sale of a company, but it just happened to own the land. And more recently, the other example is the sale of the Lanai Company by Dole Company to
Larry Ellison,
who owns Oracle, and that didn't that passed as a company and not as the sale of real property. And the poor assessors on Maui are going, well, what's the value? How do we? What's the modern day value? Because that last transfer was like 25 years ago when Murdoch bought the Dole Company. So there are consequences to actions taken by the legislature that they couldn't even begin to realize the effect that it would have. Now, you talk about rating special funds. The best one I can think of is the is the rating of the bottle deposit fees.
Yes, that's one of my favorite to talk about because, tell us about how the bottle fee went into effect and why it supposedly went into effect, and now how much, I do stories on that once in a while where I keep track of the fund, but tell us about that.
Well, the nickel per beverage container, let's call it a beverage container, was imposed in the mid-2000, 2004, 2005, somewhere around there. And it was all supposed to go into a special fund. The whole idea was to encourage people to return their beverage containers, get their nickel back, it was to encourage them from not littering the highways. And we were assured, no, that money would be there to encourage consumers to do that. Well, by 2010, that promise had melted into the past, and that fund was rated for, I think, 2 years. And the money's gone. They're not going to replace it. And it's also because I guess their program really wasn't successful because a lot of people didn't return their containers.
Well, the other thing is because they made it so difficult here in Hawaii to return. I mean, our kids used to collect the bottles, go wait in line. It's hot in the sun. You have to sort the bottles and cans. And then if you have too many, like, say, example, a couple hundred, they weigh it so you don't get the value of 5 cents per bottle or can. And so the kids get discouraged where they collect all these bottles and cans and they think, oh, I'm going to get some good money, and they end up with getting substantially less than they should.
Right.
So it's not a user-friendly system, and I think we're the only ones in the country that do it like this in terms of returning it to recyclable areas instead of shopping malls or things like that.
Right. And one of the reasons why, and I would agree with it, is that if, as you do in, say, California, return it to your store or wherever you shop, it's not so bad on the mainland where property isn't as valuable as it is here. When that bottle fee was enacted, I think a lot of the retailers objected to it because their valuable real estate, whatever size it may have been, to put a recycling bin or a machine or whatever, was just that much more of an expense for them because
you
they
can
lost
understand
square
that.
footage. I can understand that.
Yeah.
But that's where, passion overcame good sound logic, and people didn't think about it, think it through. I think it's another reason why, for example, the single-use bag fee proposal that's been touted out there for the last couple of years wasn't enacted, because we've seen the rating of all of these funds that supposedly were supposed to go for a good purpose, and they don't, and they misuse it. So.
Well, with the bottle thing, beverage container fee, what bothered me about it, besides the fact that we already have a city ordinance or a city opportunity to recycle through our blue containers here on Oahu, and the other islands have recycling as well. But and we're not charged. I mean, I know we pay for it somehow, but in other words, we're not charged a fee up front, like 6 cents, and then get 5 cents back.
Right.
But the other thing about it is it grew government bigger, because here you have the Department of Health running a bottle recycling business, and that just doesn't make any sense to me.
And like it or not, they hired people. It
Right.
just added people to the payroll, and we're paying for it. So, I have very little sympathy when I hear a lot of bureaucrats and administrators decry the fact that their budget's been cut, or so many vacant positions they can't do the work. The question is, could they have done it better by making some changes, and instead of just adding people? And so the bottle program certainly is one of those that I question, why did we need it? I mean, did we really need additional bureaucracy, or just did it create more jobs that increase the cost of personnel in the department and the state across the board? So instead of shrinking government, we're just finding ways to expand it.
I don't want to run out of time, but I want to talk to you about the another big problem we have here in Hawaii, which is unfunded liabilities. Mm-hmm. And you can explain it best, I'm sure, but basically we owe the public workers a retirement and health care. We pay for the health care as taxpayers, and it's gotten to the point where Hawaii is one of the worst places in the nation for unfunded liabilities. I know some organizations have rated us third worst in terms of what needs to be funded per capita. And we've even been designated as a sinkhole state, one of the top 5 in the country. But tell us about some of the issues that came up about unfunded liabilities. Maybe give us the big picture, and what it is that the legislature did this year to address it, and why you don't think that will be as successful as it should be.
Well, I think this year the legislature, wanting to prove to our bond raters, for example, people who look at our finances, that they are making a genuine effort to pay down these unfunded liabilities, passed a measure that will basically say, if the legislature or the state and the counties don't meet their annual obligations that they're going to forecast, this is how much we should put aside every year, that the difference between what they put in and what was required will be taken out of the general excise tax for the state purpose, and out of the county's share of the TAT, or the transit accommodations tax, the hotel room tax. And that sounds all fine and good, and the objection that we raised with the state funding that is taking of the general excise tax is that we go back to that same discussion of, those are general fund receipts. Are you going to count them as expenditures for the constitutional spending ceiling requirement? And while they did add a provision in the bill to say that the director of finance is to report, to the governor and the legislature that the funding out of the general excise, together with all other expenditures, cause us to go over the spending limit, what good is that if it also permits legislators or the governor in the future to merely raise taxes so that we have enough money to cover the unfunded liability and programs as well? And I think our viewers need to remember that, a lot of the unfunded liability occurred in the case of the retirement system, because the retirement system fund was rated when we had a provision in the law that said anything in excess of 8% earnings per year can be taken by the legislature and used for other purposes, and that's what they did. Instead of saying, that's money that we've set aside, let it roll over, generate more income, and they maybe won't have to make those contributions. That's one side of the problem. The second side of the problem is that going into the future, I think if you've been watching companies in the private sector, fewer and fewer companies are offering the kind of generous retirement and health benefits that the public employees enjoy. And until and when we change that, and we can change it prospectively. People are right when they say, well, the Constitution protects the public employee benefits. That's true for those people who are there now, because once they sign a contract to come work for government, we promise them these benefits. That does not guarantee those same benefits for people who are still out there waiting to apply for a job. And so moving forward, the legislature and the public employee unions have to bite the bullet and say, we've got to do something about those benefits. In a few years, the state and the counties will be the only employers that have a defined benefit retirement plan. That is where the benefits are outlined from the get-go based on what the compensation, years of service, and this is how much you get. We don't know where we're going to get the money to pay you, but this is how much you're going to get. Today, most employees in the private sector have what we call 401k plans or 403bs, SEPs, and whatnot, all of which is a defined contribution plan. I will set aside 3% of my salary, and my employer will match me 3% or whatever, percentage point for percentage point, up to 3% or 6% or whatever. But it's not a guarantee if I don't put my share in. So if I don't make a contribution out of my current salary, then there won't be any retirement benefit for me when I get to the end. So that's why there's an incentive for employees and for financial advisors to tell employees that they need to set something aside, because there is no guarantee that you'll get a pension check once you retire. That is a very generous benefit that we really need to rethink. But the more pressing problem are the retirees' health benefits. While they have changed for some of the employees in recent years, the premiums are not fully covered or paid by state government. If you don't have the number of years, blah, 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 it's still more than what the private sector is getting. And I don't know if a lot of your viewers know that not only are the health premiums for our retirees paid or fully paid or partially paid, but retirees who then go on to Medicare at age 65, they get reimbursed by us, the taxpayers and state government, for the premium that is taken out of their Social Security check for Medicare. And a lot of people, even in state government, don't realize this until you tell them, well, you know, you're made whole by us, the taxpayer, because you get your Medicare premium reimbursed to you, and so you're made whole, and unlike me or you, we're out the $109 or whatever it costs once we get to age 65.
The other thing that I think people don't realize is that not only is the employee's benefits paid for, but their spouse as well, right?
In some cases, those people who retired before a certain date, the spouses are fully covered. And, you know, with us, and what I think happened, Malia, is back when we created those benefits, it was prior to collective bargaining, which was adopted in 1968. And so a way to reward our public employees was to give them generous pension and health benefits. Once collective bargaining came into being in 1968, the wages and salaries were almost on par with private sector. But the retirement plan and the health benefits were far superior then to what was afforded a private sector employee. And the other thing is that we didn't expect to live this long. You know, people back in the 60s, the age, you know, death was probably in the early 70s. And now people are living to, I just saw an obituary for a person who died at 102. So, you know, as even these baby boomers move into the ranks of the retirees, the question is, how long will they live, and how much money will we need to put away so that we can continue to pay them their pension and health benefits until they reach 110? Who knows? And in fact, I think it was National Geographic or one of those magazines, Time, that said, this baby's going to live to 120. And you go, are we going to have enough money to cover that baby's retirement years? You know, we're talking anywhere from 35 to 45 years of retirement pension pay.
I do not want to live till 110. I just want to put it on the record. I'll be really wrinkled by then. I don't think I want to be around for that.
But it's, you know, it's scary because there are people living beyond 100. And,
right.
And if we are obligated to pay, we're obligated to pay.
Exactly. Well, Lowell, another big issue that your organization takes on are tax credits and are they fair? And one of the issues that came up that's controversial is about film tax credits, and of course there's been solar tax credits and so on. But maybe you can talk about film tax credits, what passed this year, and do you think that's going to work out for the taxpayer?
Well, there were two bills that enacted or extended tax credits. One was the research and development credit, but its requirements were tightened, so they're very much similar now to the federal research tax credit. And the biggest change there was that the credit only goes to the amount of increased expenditures over and above what you spent the last year and claimed for. I guess in our estimation, those research tax credits at the state level are just gravy for because there is a federal tax credit that does the same thing. And if the whole intent is to encourage more research and development in this state, it's not going to happen if we don't have the intellectual infrastructure. You got to have the Silicon Valley, so to speak, of people who are real smart and they do research. And that's just not going to happen here without fixing our university and our academic communities. The second tax credit, of course, is the film tax credit. And of course, there's lots of sex appeal. I mean, you had George Clooney and The Descendants and Lost and Hawaii Five-0. And the advocates, scream and shout that we have to compete with other states, Louisiana, Arizona, without realizing that we have an asset even more valuable than they do, and that is the beauty of Hawaii. And the fact that they can film 365 days a year. They don't have to contend with snow. They don't have to contend with, having to go indoors or avoid a tornado or deal with swamps. And when they proposed it this year, they said, well, we have to compete, so we're going to up the credit. So the limit per productions goes from $6 to $8 million, or $8 million to more than $8 million. The fact is that it's a transfer of tax dollars just like we spend them. So, credits can be claimed as long as you meet the parameters of the tax credit legislation. There's nobody looking over your shoulder and saying, well, we don't like that Blue Babes film about surfing.
Right, exactly. They just get the tax credit, right.
As long as they meet those parameters, they get the credit.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're already out of time, Lowell, so we're going to have another show just to talk about more stuff.
Sorry.
No. So I wanted people to make sure they go to your website. Tell us your website.
tfhawaii.org.
And people should support you. They can support you through contributions, and I want to make sure people do that because you are very deserving and you really fight for the taxpayer once again. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll have another show soon.
It's my pleasure.
All right, Lowell. This has been News Behind the News. Aloha.